I'm Anna McKee. I'm a reporter at Times Higher Education. And thanks to everybody for joining me for this session on digital assessment, which has obviously become an important part of the switch to online learning that institutions had to make so swiftly this time last year. But of course, many institutions, academics and leaders have been interested in digital assessment pre-pandemic, but the rapid switch has, of course, proved a real catalyst for change in this area. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about the University of Bath and its experience and the institution's journey to digital assessment. And yes, joining me is Donald Lancaster, a senior lecturer in marketing and director of studies for full-time and executive MBA at Bath, and Ishan Kolhatkar, a general manager UK of Inspera Assessment, which has been delivering digital examination sessions for the education sector since 2008. And is a recent partner of the University of Bath and also a THE Live content partner. So I'm going to hand it over to Ishan first to hear a bit more about their experience.
Thank you very much. Well, I was going to say good evening, everyone, but of course it's only evening here in London. I'm acutely aware that it's somewhere between a late breakfast and an early lunch across the United States, something that I'm more acutely aware of as a baseball fan. With the season starting tomorrow, I will note that I'll have to stay up late to watch the games. In case you're wondering, I'm a New York Mets fan because I crave disappointment, clutching on to a tiny bit of hope. I'm also a Chicago Bears fan, so you can see the theme that runs through that. But I'm not here today to talk to you about my love of US sports. In a moment, you're going to hear from Donald Lancaster, who's going to talk about the University of Bath's experience of using Inspera and digital assessment. But I was just going to take a few moments at the beginning to talk to you about assessment and the possibilities with digital assessment. A year ago, I wasn't working at Inspera. I was at a university in the UK where I had implemented Inspera, and we were considering how we were going to respond to the pandemic we find ourselves in. I'm sure many of you listening will have had the same experience that I did, which was thinking about how you get teaching online, and then the penny drops a little while later that assessment needs to be done too. And assessment can sometimes be that forgotten part of the education journey, or the one that comes a bit later. And so I've just got a couple of ideas that I want to share with you, where if you're thinking about digital assessment, or if you're doing it now and you want to refresh it, things that you might do rather than just trying to digitize the paper that you've got. So I'm afraid I can't see the slides at the moment, so I don't know which slide is up, but there we go. Excellent. So 5 quick ideas on ways that you can think about digital assessment. I'm going to preface it by saying we have this real worry that everyone is trying to cheat. And the fact is that most students aren't. Most students really just want to show their knowledge. And so what we often end up doing is making people do exams in a way that we think is almost, bulletproof to avoiding them from cheating in any way or doing things that they shouldn't. Which is a strange thing to do because that's not how we live our lives. In a previous life, I was a barrister, a trial attorney, and I did my last exam back in 2002, where I sat in a large hall and in silence did an exam. And I never did that again. As a trial attorney, I spent most of my time pacing up and down my room with a can of Diet Coke, which I still haven't kicked the habit of. And that is how I did exams, or that's how I live my life. So let's think about what we could do differently. If what we're really worried about is people collaborating, let's steer into the skid. Let's make them collaborate. Make that part of what you actually assess. If you imagine the idea of saying to them, to a group of 5 maybe, collaborate together and do some research, and then I'll give you 5 individual questions, or the same question in 5 different ways, or personalize it to them. Actually make that collaboration part of what you get them to do. And in a digital context, you can get them to share what they're doing with ease in a way that you couldn't in a pen and paper world. Oral exams. Again, as a former attorney, you might imagine that's what I think about first, but talk to people. Anyone who's marked an exam script will at some point have had the experience of thinking, oh, if only I could ask the candidate just to explain what this means, because I just don't understand. Do an exam where they do just that. Talk to them, explore their knowledge. And again, doing it online means you can mark it in the same way. You can mark it online. You can have a recording of them if they consent to you doing so. And it really does help their understanding and help yours of what they know. Reflection. I'm sure you're all doing this to differing extents, but if the worry is that people are using other people to do their exams or copying off one another, the more you personalize that exam, the more you personalize that assessment, the lower the chance is that they can do that, because they're going to write about themselves and what they know and what they do. If you really have to use questions, multiple choice questions in particular, consider question banks. If you've got a good question bank, you can then randomize what people see. You can, if you go as far as automatic test construction, again, an area where digital can really help, you can serve up different questions to people. And I know I say this to an audience in the US where you guys have been doing this for a lot longer than most. You've got probably the most advanced, maybe understanding and usage of test banks and question banks, but using it at a smaller scale is indeed possible. And the final one is, again, just open book, giving people tasks that really reflect what they're going to do in real life. These are all things that you can do digitally and take advantage of the systems that you've got. So rather than just thinking, I'm going to digitize that exam I've got because then I can serve it up remotely, or I can get people to come into a computer lab and do it, rather than thinking that proctoring is the first thing to run to, I'm going to suggest that what you do when you think about digital assessment is think about making your assessments and your exams very much part of 2021 and the features and the tools that you can use digitally to make them better. So that's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Donald. You'll hear from me for about a minute at the end, but thanks again for listening. Donald, over to you.
Thank you very much. And welcome to everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. Very briefly, I'm going to run through the things on your screen. I won't take much time to go through an agenda, but basically this is a case history from Bath, talking about what we've learned through the last sort of 3 years, and I'm going to try and do that all in sort of 18 minutes if I can do it. So next slide, please. A little bit of background for where this came from. I spent most of my working life in international business. And to be honest, since about the mid-90s, I've done almost no handwriting. I did have to sit an exam in 2016, and by the end of it, nobody could read my writing, and my wrist was cramped. In 2017, I had 800 handwritten essays to mark. It was a nightmare. So that really put the bee in my bonnet about what can we do. And of course, I happened then to go to a teaching conference in 2017, where, build please, Ishan, the idea came up of using digital exams. So next slide, please. What have we done since then? We've run at the University of Bath a lot of pilots. This is all pre-COVID, what you're looking at on your screen right now. So since 2018, we've taken 13 pilots across the institution, across faculties, way beyond the School of Management, in different semesters with different cohort sizes, different devices, different question typologies, summative, formative, lots of different stuff going on. The most complex one was probably one where we had 193 students involved. And I wanted to really pressure test the system. So we used a mix of multiple choice questions, of drag and drop things, of missing words, of graphic match. And we also had an essay answer as well. We had the students bring their own device, which is a really useful thing to do. And as a consequence, we were using 5 different rooms with 12 invigilators and a bunch of technicians to make sure everything worked. So it really was a pressure test. But through all of these tests, we've learned a lot, and that's what I want to share with you now. So next slide, please. First off, we need to make sure that the systems are working properly. So we do need to make sure that the administration teams, the professional services, call them what you will, are properly geared up. And if you're running tests to start with, there's probably a more intensive data management system, because it needs to be done manually rather than automatically to load students into the system and to download marks afterwards. You need to prepare invigilators as well. There needs to be a certain amount of training for them because it's an unfamiliar system. So it's a really good idea to make sure that they understand what's going on. And indeed, you know, we ran 3 trials in that particular set to make sure that they could understand how to invigilate online. And really importantly, you have to prepare your students. So we had something like 4 drop-in laptop clinics so that we could make sure that the software that they were using was up to speed, that they downloaded Safe Exam Browser so that they could lock down their machines. We had 3 trials of the exam online with test exams, obviously enough. We introduced them to the platform in 2 different lectures to try and cover the broadest cross-section of students. And we had a survey on the VLE, on Moodle, to both help them and help us prepare from their knowledge base. Next slide, please. So from a student learning perspective, this slide builds, Ishan, but students learn best when they're focusing on learning. So most students, as we're well aware these days, rarely handwrite outside exams. They use laptops and tablets all the time in lecture theatres and at home. Distractions get in the way. So whether in learning or assessment modes, it's really important to minimize unfamiliarity. Ishan, please. If that's working, yep. And we want to minimize their anxiety about handwriting. They're anxious and we are anxious as faculty as well. Next, please. We want to familiarize them with their own device. Next build, please. And so using a bring your own device format is really helpful. The kids are used to using their own machines. They're much more familiar than that they are with pencil and paper. Next, please. They're familiar with the edit tools that they use all the time, copying, pasting, reordering bullets. You can't do that with handwritten exams, so it's a really good idea. And of course, we can get them instant copies of graded submissions if we want. So that really helps. And we can run remote exams in various different time zones. And of course, last but not least, there is a degree of fairness. Last build there is shown. Now, are there any negatives to this from a student point of view? Next build. The first thing is anxiety about kit, whether their laptop is going to be up to the mark, whether the software they've got is sufficient, whether they have confidence in their Wi-Fi connection. And of course, that there's sometimes concerns about power as well, whether their battery is going to run out. So there's some concerns there. Next slide, please. We have run some surveys, and this is just an example of one that we ran amongst a bunch of students before a trial of the exam software in class and again afterwards. So next build, please. And you will notice, interestingly, the dramatic reduction in anxiety at the left-hand side of these graphs and the increase in confidence at the right-hand side of these graphs. So even just trialing it changes students' mindsets towards the positive. And a way of looking at that, next slide, please, is this little email from a student who said that she wanted to send an email because she was feeling really positive about it. I won't read the whole thing, you can see it on your screens, but lots and lots of benefits, academically, psychologically, physically, and she's saying that an awful lot of students felt the same way and would love to see more exams in line with this in the future. Next slide, please. Oh, and the next one, yeah, thanks. There are some issues that students face, no question about that. And from a university perspective, one of the big ones is that a lot of students, despite all the efforts that we've made, can arrive at the exam unprepared. So sometimes they haven't got the right software loaded up or they haven't prepared. Some even have not realized that it would be a digital exam, which is quite interesting. And there were some complaints because we changed the format, that there weren't previous papers for them to look at and revise from in the library. But most concerns from students were around battery life and whether it was easier or not to handwrite versus typing. I always think that's really, really interesting because when we had handwritten exams, we never asked them whether it was fair that people could type faster than they could write. And there were some concerns, which was my own fault, about whether there would be negative marking on a multiple choice question. That's very easy to set up in advance. Next slide, please. From a teacher learning point of view, there's lots and lots of benefits. Obviously, machine grading allows teachers to offer more formative assessments more frequently and to offer automated feedback and reporting, helping students to progress and helping staff to progress as well. Multiple formats can assess different learning outcomes. And of course, around the corner, we can expect artificial intelligence to provide personalized student feedback, intelligent grading, learning guidance, and indeed guidance to teachers on student progress and course progress. And of course, we can easily link the outcome of this stuff to the virtual learning environment, whether that's Moodle, Blackboard, Canvas, or whatever else, and to the student information systems as well. Are there any negatives here? Any buts? Well, no is the answer. Next build, please. So from a teacher perspective, everyone's happy. And again, next slide, a little bit of feedback from a colleague who was invigilating, who asked 64 students how they felt about it, and all but 3 were highly enthusiastic. Next slide, please. From a teacher teaching point of view, ease of use is by far the biggest positive that I've had fed back to me, whether that be in authoring, editing, managing, especially marking, obviously, legibility, which leads to greater fairness, but also things like portability. We're not carrying around thousands of exam papers, and auditability, papers don't get lost, shareability with the click of a button. So once teachers are familiar with digital exams, there's really no going back. Ishan mentioned question banks, really, really useful, building these up over time, sharing them across divisions or departments, and thereby avoiding overlap, building consistency, helping to build a complete program. And there's multiple formats which can assess knowledge and understanding and application. And logistically, we're not going to be bound by room availability or whether it's open book or closed book. Are there any buts? Next build, please. Well, yes, we need to make sure that we train our colleagues to make the best of the application and the platform. They need to have a degree of technical competence when trying to explain it to students. We do want to get what we call TEL, which is a technology enhanced learning team, get their support so they can then support both faculty and students. And we need to be able to provide broader help to students with their laptops, with their software, and with technical competence. And of course, that's not a usual skill for academics to provide, so we may want to get some external support there. Next slide, please. From an institutional point of view, the big thing, build please, is that it is cheaper. At Bath, we have over 17,000 students enrolled in education, so the volume of assessments is enormous. We reckon that each student does roughly 11 exams every year. That means 180,000 handwritten multi-page exam scripts every year. All of those need printing, production, delivery, distribution, need to be collected, need to be sorted out, distributed to graders and markers, then read and marked, and then they have to go to moderators and get read and moderated, and then they have to go to external examiners, and then back to professional services to be checked, resorted, stored. It is an exhaustive process and expensive. Paper and printing of just those exams costs us something like $130,000 a year, and that doesn't include time costs or faculty and staff costs. So next build, please. Obviously, they are bulky, they're costly, they're environmentally unfriendly. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But handwritten exams persist in most educational establishments because of outdated reasons of security and fairness and tradition, I suppose. It's interesting. Next build, please. That there is a huge dependence on large venues, on exam furniture, on invigilators with big establishment costs, logistics nightmares. But of course, we can be much more flexible with digital exams. We're not limited to rooms or even particular times. Next build, please. We can have increasingly sophisticated invigilation. It doesn't need to be people wandering around a room with a black cape and a big stick. So proctoring and invigilation is probably the next big technology advance within digital exams. Next, please. We can have easy alternative assessments where students might need them for whatever reason. And we can have them at any time we like. We can even have exam on demand. Next, please. It's very easy as well to make adjustments either beforehand or on the fly for any circumstance that might arise. It may be beforehand for disabilities, for sickness, whatever, or during an exam, if there's some problem, some existential problem, we can apply extra time or send messages to students in real time. Next, please. Of course, it's enormously auditable as a digital process. There's a trail of everything that goes on, which makes it much more secure. There's no chance of papers being lost on trains or being eaten by the dog or whatever does tend to happen these days. And next bill, please. It is, of course, a very effective system if designed well for assessing both learning and understanding and the application of the learning and understanding. Are there any negatives? Well, next bill, please. Yes. The first one is that we've got to be very conscious of power. If we're asking students to bring their own devices and bring lots of them into one venue, providing power to every seat can be costly, can be difficult. So just be conscious of that. Similarly, Wi-Fi. And last bill, please. We need to make sure that we are training our staff and our students to get the best out of this software. Next slide, please. To date, handwritten exams have become almost personal, if you like. There is the author, the examiner, there's a moderator, and that's kind of it. But for digital exams, we've discovered that there's about 36 people across many departments who are not used to working together. If we go through these quickly, next bill, please, is the university establishment, the leadership, really important to get the leadership behind you, and the computing services that we've talked about. So whether that be about networks or about security or about the applications that need to interlink or even procurement in buying this stuff, work with those people. Next, please. We need to make sure that registry and what we would call the exams office are on board and helping to administer, making sure that the student records are correct for every exam. Next, please. We have our Center for Learning and Teaching, which is what we call, and they are responsible for making sure that all this stuff meets academic rigor and is applicable across the university and fair for all. Next, please. Obviously, we've got our faculties, both in academic terms across all the different faculties, but the professional services as well who support those faculties. Next, please. We can't ignore the student union and therefore the students, last bill there, please, which is critically important. And we need the students union and the students to be fully on board. And once they've tried this stuff, there's no question that they will be on board. Next slide, please. From an environmental point of view, we've discussed costs. I don't want to go there again, but we can estimate that just the printing of about 20 sheets of paper, the exam paper, the answer book, what have you, the candidate sheets, the seat sheets, is going to raise something like 0.04 grams of CO2 each time. Now, of course, devices have a carbon footprint as well, but from our investigations, it seems likely that that's somewhere between 1/2 and 1/10 of the cost of print in environmental terms. And that cost does not include all the other elements of bulky heavy transport or of distribution or of storage of paper for several years. And actually you can build these 3 points there, Ishan, the 4 points, sorry. We have undoubtedly a climate emergency globally. It's actually got a name at Bath. We call it the Climate Action Framework to deal with it. And student union and other unions are increasingly strident about demands for action. So using digital exams is a way of demonstrating commitment to overcome this crisis. It's a clear win for the institution and for the environment. Next slide, please. So we've talked about the major issues. I think this is pretty clear. In the interest of time, I won't go through these very much. And power can be an issue, so we need to be conscious of that. Inevitably, everywhere you go, there's going to be a certain resistance to change. Expect that, but overcome it by testing and training. Thinking about how to make the best of the facilities is what Ishan was talking about before. So not just translating what you used to do into a new format, but actually thinking carefully about how to audit and author properly. Thinking about the logistics that the system operates or offers you is important. There's lots of different perspectives on how that can work. And use the platform to its greatest advantage to deliver student enhancement and faculty enhancement. Next, please. We have to be cognizant of the corona effect. Clearly a terrible, terrible thing. Nobody would want that. But amidst the darkness, there have been some positive outcomes. It has forced almost every higher education institution to rethink the way that it behaves, as Ishan was saying earlier on. So it's been a catalyst for change, or an accelerator of change towards remote and digital assessment. So it's been quite interesting how early adopters have become mavens and champions within this sphere. And those hitherto reluctant people and places are now having to accept an almost inevitable solution. It is the way the world will be tomorrow. Next slide, please. So in the last year, we are very pleased that the University of Bath has adopted wholesale digital exam platform across every faculty, every exam, not just during the pandemic, but for the foreseeable future. So we're really, really pleased about that. And I think it's made a significant enhancement for our students, for our staff, and also for our reputation as a forward-looking institution. Next slide, please. Very briefly, just repeating what I've said, for students, typing versus handwriting is anyway the norm. So e-exams are a very small step into what we might consider to be the new norm. For academics, as they explore and gain confidence with the system, the range of possibilities is huge, and it allows better assessment across a broader set of learning outcomes, and it's easier. For the institution, which of those is not interested in saving costs? And as a side benefit, there are experiential enhancements for students, for staff, for professional services, and for administrators. And finally, of course, for the planet, there should be no going back. Lower environmental costs at every stage, making use of digital assessment, whether remote or informal settings, is a no-brainer. And that, I think, is that. So, oh, there's a couple of bills on there, Rajan, but thanks, over to you.
Thank you very much, Donald. Thank you. I'm aware that we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm just going to take you through this last slide. At the moment, you have a virtual learning environment, and you use a virtual learning environment to make sure that your students have the best way of learning. You don't just put everything on OneDrive or Dropbox, you drive them to a place where they can learn. I'm going to suggest that you need to do the same thing when it comes to assessment. You need a platform rather than trying to put together lots of different things, so that you have a single student environment for your assessments. You reduce the strain on your virtual learning environment rather than just bolting things onto that to make it do assessment, because there's a difference in the way that people use it. In a learning environment, people are going to look at pages, click from time to time. In assessment, you've got lots of people trying to use it at the same time. By having a platform, it's the single source of truth for your assessment data. And you can create a mixed diet of assessments. And most importantly, for anyone who's had any experience in systems, you don't have to bolt everything together. I'm going to suggest to you that by having a VLE or a learning environment and trying to do exams on that, you were the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 12 months ago, and your platform is Tom Brady. That is the thing that's going to bring it all together and make it work and make you successful. And as a Bears fan, that really makes me wince, as I had to say it out loud. But there we are. There's about 40 seconds left. I'm sorry that we haven't finished enough time for you to ask questions, but thank you very much for listening to us today, and we really hope you enjoyed the rest of your day.
I just want to say thank you to you both. And yeah, we didn't have time for questions, but I thought that was a really comprehensive presentation from both of you. And I think that, yes, this idea that teaching and learning and assessment should all be one and be together. And especially when we're sort of thinking about the future of a digital environment, I think that was some really good points there. And yeah, I found that was fascinating. So thank you very much to you both. And I hope everyone else enjoyed that panel and enjoys the rest of THE Live. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.